Hey everyone, welcome back to another season of Parenting is Easy, Said No Never. I am your host, Chananya Abraham. And in season 2, we are going to get a little more specific on different things that we can do as parents to try to better ourselves and better our children and better our communication and overall way of life when it comes to dealing with our kids and our teenagers. Starting with the first episode, we're going to be talking about some internet and online addiction, social media. We're going to be talking about reading. We're going to be talking about how to enhance friendships and how to enhance communication when it comes to the family dynamics. We have so many other topics coming up. And like always, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you have any ideas for a future podcast or a guest, please feel free to email us. Or if you have any questions or comments at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. In today's episode, I had an amazing conversation with Alex, who is I don't even know how to refer to him, but I guess the best way for me to say it is he is a real, authentic therapist that has been dealing with this online social media addictions dependence world, especially when it comes to teens and teenagers. And there were so many different nuanced pieces that we talked about, from community to structure to communication to having guidance ourselves as parents, that I think are so important for all of us. I really hope you enjoyed this episode because I'm so glad to share you my awesome conversation with Alex. So, Alex, I'm going to jump right into it over here because there are so many different areas within this topic of technology and social media that I really want to talk about. And I want to really break it down to two main areas that I want to talk about with you. First is the family dynamic, and then there's the peer dynamic of things. So let's first talk about, the family dynamics. And I think one of the things that come to mind first, that I know personally as a therapist, I'm constantly working with parents, is the fact that it's a different generation. And what might have been something that was important or really a topic that needs to be talked about maybe in the 80s and 90s, or maybe even early 2000s, is something a little bit different than in 2024. And I think there's a certain level of needing for parents to need to be able to relate and understand what kids are into, what kids are following or not following, or whether it's certain apps or certain topics. And I'm curious, how do you talk about that to parents or in your practice when it comes to parents being relatable and relative to the situation, but yet at the same time approaching it with a certain caution and in a respectful way with their kids?
Great question. Yeah, it's, of course, a very tricky thing because, as parents, especially when it's a tween or an adolescent, you're trying to walk a very fine line, right? And you're trying to not be too familiar, too much like a friend, but also, just as you said, right, trying to relate and trying to connect, particularly during this period of time in their kids' lives when they're maybe wanting more independence and are pushing parents away a little bit. So one thing that I often will talk to parents about is that, hey, I understand, for example, that you really don't like your son's gaming, but the more that you demonize it, the more that you kind of talk smack, as they say, about it, the more you're actually pushing your kid away. And often teens can sort of hear parents hating the game and interpret that as hating the player. Because often, right, this is part of their identity, again, particularly at this kind of stage of development, when kids and teens are trying to figure out who they are and what their roles are in life. So, does that mean that parents should never game with their kids? No, not at all. But what it does mean is that if you're going to, for example, engage with your kids directly in whether it's, going on Insta together or, gaming, that you first kind of discuss boundaries and you first talk about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what it's going to look like. Okay, we're going to play for an hour, then we're going to go outside and go on a bike ride. So just trying to, again, make sure that you're walking that fine line. And I think the last thing I want to say about that is often there can be a sort of urgency on the parent's part. Like, I have to know exactly what my kid's doing. I have to know everything that they're getting into online. And it's simply not possible. And I think look no further than a lot of the school districts, right, who are handing out these laptops to kids. And of course, they're all restricted and secured. And within a week, almost every kid, and there's a middle school in particular I'm thinking of, has found ways to bypass, right, all the security and privacy and parental control protocols that the school district has implemented. So kids are going to find a way, right? When there's a will, there's a way. And teens especially, right? As you were kind of mentioned earlier, they are digital natives. So they grew up with this tech. And so it's the kind of thing that when you start to notice that your desire to connect, or your desire to intervene, or your desire to monitor is creating greater distance, that's usually the indicator that it's time to, pull back or make a change.
I love that. And there are so many different things here, Alex, that you said I think are really important. I'm going to highlight, I think the most important thing that you said is hitting the player instead of the game, which is what the child sometimes interprets, which obviously as a parent, no one wants their child to feel like, well, my mom doesn't believe in me, or thinks that there's something wrong with me for what I'm doing. And I think that's such an important point, not just in gaming, but in general. Anytime our child does something, to let them know that the action that they did is something that we expect better, or they can be better with, as opposed to there's something wrong with them, from taking an extra cookie as a midnight snack to gaming, or to coming a few minutes home late from a curfew, whether they have your car or not. I think all those situations, we want to make sure that we're talking to them about the action that they did or that they're doing, as opposed to who they are. And I'm so happy you brought that up, because I think that's a really, really important point. And I think to your point as well regarding the concept of boundaries, knowing that there is a certain sense of autonomy that this teenager is trying to find. And our job as a parent, I'm saying this as a parent, probably more than a therapist, is to make sure that we're giving them that space to grow the way they want to grow. And I'm there for you. And I'm here to support you in you growing the way you want to grow, with hopefully taking some of the seeds and some of the nutrients that I've given you over the past 13, 14, 15 years. And I'm here for you. And I'm curious, how can parents, when it comes to gaming, when it comes to social media, how can they give that message? How can that be something that they're showing them that there is a certain level of trust, and maybe even blind trust in a certain way, that I'm giving over and I have to bite my lip for, because I don't know what you're talking about, or I don't know what that thing is. But at the same time, when it comes to safety, when it comes to doing things that are not going to hinder on your academics, on your social life, which we're going to get back to, all those things, how can a parent make sure that they have a healthy balance with that?
So it's funny you mentioned that, because I'm part of a work group for this fantastic advocacy organization. It's called Children's Screen Time Action Network, and one of the main things we're actually working on right now, and that I'm kind of co-leading, is a script that parents can use for talking to their kids about technology and digital wellness. And it's just remarkable, as this has been kind of iterated. I think we're on the 4th or 5th version, just how different it is when you're talking to, let's say, a middle schooler versus, a junior in high school versus a sophomore in college. And just how quickly things change, right? And how quickly the topics can shift. So for one, right, there's definitely not a size that fits all. And of course it has to be age appropriate. It has to be tailored. I think, kind of as you were talking about earlier, it's all about meeting the kid where they are, not where we feel like they quote unquote should be. And, kind of on that point, having a way to have that conversation that, gives you like, okay, here's an intro, here's a way to, further provide evidence for your belief of why you think they need to limit their screen time, or why you think they need to not, game right before bed or something like that. But again, balancing that with what the teen or kid is passionate about. So, for example, if they're really, really into gaming and esports, and this is just a big part of their life, even if it's the last thing that you want them to be interested in, sitting down and trying to honor that and saying, look, I may not get it, but I love you, and I totally understand and appreciate that this is a huge source of social connection, and this is a huge source of a sense of mastery and achievement and competency, and right, you're getting a lot out of this. So I think acknowledging that from the get-go, it doesn't mean you have to like it. No one is requiring that for this conversation. It just means that you're seeing it and letting them know that you see them.
There are so many great points in that that I want to go into just a little bit. But I think the number of things you're saying, and when we started season 2, I was like, all right, let's see if we have like a different focus on things. But you're bringing up such a great point that I think it's my own thing that I have to get out of my head. It's communication. And when it comes to how we're going to be talking to our kids and when we're going to be talking to our kids and the topic we're talking about with our kids, communicating, sitting down with them, like you said, and just having this discussion. Hey, I don't understand this Insta thing, or I don't understand Snap. I don't know how this works, but I'm also concerned about things that, you could be blackmailed by, God forbid, or having a situation where you might lose a lot of money, or you might spiral into a place where your social life is going to be something that's going to be drastically affected. And these are my concerns. So, can we talk about that? Can we make it, can you reassure me in some way that, you have this under control, and yes, the trust is there. And sometimes it's really hard for a parent to say, and I am guilty of that 100%. But I think it's something that needs to be brought to the table. And I'm so glad you talked about that. And while there are so many more things that we can pinpoint regarding creating that balance, you bring up another very, very important point regarding the social aspect of things. And in many, many ways, when it comes to our teenagers, their social life is their heartbeat. And it is something that is at the front lines, the middle lines, the back lines of their entire way of being. And that's no offense to us parents, or to the last name in the household, but it's just the way they look at themselves, that their social being is their life. And obviously nowadays, when we talk about the social life, online, social media is probably the number one place where most teenagers are going to have their social life. What are some pointers that parents can try to look out for, but also maybe talk to their kids about regarding, yes, online is something that you're a part of and it's embraced, and we're going to embrace it more, and I'm working on myself to embrace it more. But at the same time, I want you to be aware that the social life is also as important to have a physical one, whether it's with sports or arts or some other way. How can parents have that discussion with kids so that they can realize that, yes, your social life online or social media is something that is a part of your life, and I respect that, but also make sure that you have an outside social life as well.
Yeah, and such a critical distinction, and I think it's such an important point that, as wonderful as technology is, and I'm certainly anything but a Luddite myself, but it also, as I think is, luckily quickly becoming kind of common knowledge, it's pretty hard to feel, the anywhere close to level of connection you get from, an audio call or even a video call compared to in person. So I think especially for kids that are connecting with their friends online, whether it's text on the phone or typing on the computer, or they're on Discord using audio while they're gaming, all of that is nonverbal, right? So you're missing out. You're missing out on all the nonverbal communication, right? Which is a huge portion of communication that we often don't think about. So the fact that kids are missing out on that means, just as you said, there really has to be, for the sake of their own social development, some amount of in-person socialization. And so maybe that's once a month. Maybe that's every third social engagement they have. It really, really, of course, depends on the person and the family, but I think that's something pretty critical to really try and enforce. And then also just making sure that, like, when you're thinking about, all right, well, how much time goes into, this activity, that activity versus socializing versus online, what I like to do is I'll sit down and say, okay, hey, draw a circle. And in that circle, right, we're going to say that's a 24-hour period in your life. And I want you to then make a chunk for how much time goes into school, how much time goes into homework, how much time goes into, chores, other tasks that you have to do, right? So on and so forth. And then how much time goes into technology use. And then we flip the paper over, do the same thing, but for what they think it should look like. So if, you were to try and make the healthiest decision, not the one you want, but the healthiest, what might that look like? And usually they're pretty good and pretty accurate at knowing what is and isn't acceptable. It's not as though most teens think it's healthy to game 8 hours a day. So I think trying to honor their own wisdom and their own autonomy and sense of control, and also respect for themselves. And I think trying to frame it that way, that, hey, this isn't just about me as your parent telling you this isn't healthy or this is healthy. It's also about you, respecting yourself and honoring, your own needs, and, making sure you're getting enough sleep and eating healthy and exercising, etc. But I think that pie chart activity usually works pretty well.
That's amazing.
And so
that's amazing.
Parents and teens will all kind of do one.
Yeah, because for me, what's sticking out with what you're saying, Alex, is something visual, which I think a lot of kids nowadays are pretty much visual learners, in the sense of being able to see something in front of them. It gives them a much better sense of what the healthy reality should be, when it comes to using any technology, let alone social media. And I do agree, and I have seen that, time and time again in my office, that we don't give kids enough credit sometimes regarding them having a healthy sense of what reality should be. And I'm so glad you said that. As a parent and as a therapist, I think it's really important for us parents to hear that, our kids deserve more credit than we give them sometimes. So yeah, I say those words out loud, talking to myself, but at the same time, to also realize that our kids know right from wrong. And when we have this discussion, it goes really, really far. And I think there are so many things that we can do. And again, I'm going to reiterate this, when we have communication with them, when we sit down and we talk with them and we say, hey, how's our pie chart doing? Where are we? And just asking it as an open-ended question and letting them talk it out with us. I think that goes so far to help regulate and to realize that it's going to be different in different situations. Let's say there's a certain tournament going on, so therefore they might be a little more active on social media, and therefore their social gatherings might be a little more online because people are looking for certain, whether it's clips or songs or stuff like that. There might be a science fair happening, therefore they have to be online a little bit more. And us parents, our job is to understand that, yes, I know we usually have this amount of time for our kids to be online, but they might need a little more time during some event. And maybe during the weekends, it should be a little bit less. There's no set way. There's no set formula, like you said, regarding how to go about it. And like you said, regarding different ages, that it's important for us to know what and how they're going to be communicating with people online. The same thing with the different times of year. And throughout the year, it can change drastically. Now, there also is a limit. And there's a certain, I guess you could say, red line for a child that they can cross, and it can start showing signs of deterioration, whether it's academically, whether it's their hygiene, whether it's socially. I'm curious, from what you've seen, are there certain things that parents can look out for when it comes to that red line that is invisible, but it's there? And how do you talk about that both with kids and with parents to make sure that the red line doesn't get crossed?
Yeah, and I think that is a really, really important question because as we've both been saying, it really depends on the person. I find usually that if like a good rule of thumb is basically like if the parent is noticing that a major life domain, which right is just a fancy way of saying like a major part of your life, right? Your social life, familial life, academic life, your own self-care. When one or more of those areas is significantly impacted in a negative way, right, either directly or indirectly from the technology use, usually directly, that's typically one of those kind of surefire indicators that something needs to be addressed. So I think a classic example is, hygiene suffering, sleep. So like often you'll see teens becoming kind of nocturnal. So like literally sleeping throughout the day and getting up at night. And I think just generally finding a huge shift in personality. So, they're not the happy-go-lucky, smiling, positive kid that, parents know and love. And, obviously, right, some of that might just be being a teenager or situational. But when you see it directly connected to the tech use, it's usually pretty clear. I think the biggest mistake parents make at that point is to react and go, oh my gosh, our kid is addicted, right? They use that word, and we got to just take everything away. And that is one of the most destructive things you can do, because, right, at that point, if it truly has become an issue, the kid or teen is now dependent on it as their primary source of social connection, of coping, of, defining themselves, their identity. So taking that away without first giving them other tools and alternative behaviors and activities is really a recipe for disaster. And that's typically where I hear and see, escalation of many kinds.
Yeah, I love the way you phrase that of being able to see what's happening in the child's life, and then when we start panicking, there's a certain we have to take this away. We can't have this anymore. And I think you bring up such a good point that which is, I guess, flowing right into my next question. When parents are dealing with their own emotions, when it comes to their child being that word that you said, even though I sometimes have a hard time saying it, addicted, in a certain way. I'm curious, how do you talk to parents regarding how they're dealing with their own emotions when it comes to what that child is going through?
Yeah, it's tricky because, and again, I think like many things, addiction is a spectrum. So it's certainly not the case that just because someone like maybe technically qualifies, that means they're right in the most severe situation possible. And I think even removing that word from the equation and just thinking about, well, how is this affecting my kid's life? I think focusing more on the consequences, right? So like it is subjective, right? If I try and talk about how many hours the kid plays or what they're playing or what social media they use or if they have a phone or not, right? A lot of that is parenting calls that I really try and, not intervene on or certainly not pass judgment on. And instead just looking at, okay, well, at the end of the day, how are they doing in school? How are they doing socially? How are they at home? And if we're seeing issues and symptoms coming up around that, that's usually what I try and direct the parents' attention to. And again, not to harp on this word, but with addiction, it's a family disease. It is never the case that it is just the quote unquote identified patient. And so whether that's, enabling, whether that's because, parents are also struggling with their own tech use. It's very, very much person and case by case. So as a result, I just really, really try to, again, not really focus on those parenting calls or morality or values or anything that would, stir up any more shame than people are already feeling. And instead just focus on, what are the cold, hard facts and go from there.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think there's so many things of how to go about approaching it. I think a parent has to be very careful how they're going to approach this subject. Where I think in some ways, like the better way to say it would be like a parent should be mindful of how they're going to have this discussion with their children, for a child, whatever situation it is, and talk it out with a professional or a coach or someone that has a lot of experience in dealing with something like this. But I want to go back to one other thing that you were just saying before regarding it being a family disease. And so two-part question to this, because I think we could probably have a whole discussion just on that topic alone.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to family, I would say one of the hardest parts about being a parent, again, I'm speaking about myself personally and also what I see in my office, is the balance between having different children and having to have different rules or regulations when it comes to different children. So you brought up a very good point before regarding if, a child is doing something, but there is no change in academics, social life, or hygiene, but yet, they're staying up a little bit later than they should be because of things being pushed off, because of their gaming that they're spending an extra 45 minutes on than they're actually supposed to. And our job as a parent is to be like, hey, nothing's changing. It's not getting out of hand. And I have to keep my mouth shut here because that's the right thing to do here. So I think that's important. But at the same time, you could have another child to be like, hey, you didn't shut off his internet, Johnny's internet use because, but you shut off mine. And I think that's something that can cause some tension in the house. So balancing multiple children could be really difficult when it comes to so many different areas of parenting. And I'm curious if you have any guidance when it comes to specific regulations or rules in a certain way when it comes to electronic use in the house when you have different children. How can a parent go about that?
Yeah, great question. Something I usually like to start with, because even if it doesn't isn't ultimately considered a success, it really starts the conversation and I think enacts a very useful process in the family. And that's creating what's called a family media plan. And again, I'm going to plug Children's Screen Time Action Network. They on their website have templates. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a whole site and a online form and series of questions you can fill out together as a family and create, your own family media plan. That's actually, fairly comprehensive. So having something like that in place is really nice because it, for one, creates the sense of we're all in this together. Again, it's shying away from the identified patient or, older brother is the one with the quote unquote problem and younger brother shouldn't have any, restrictions. And instead is saying, okay, as a family, we are saying that this is the kind of relationship we want to have with technology. As a family, we are saying that these periods of time, Friday nights, everyone's phone, goes off, all devices are off. We're going to have a nice dinner together, and then we're going to all, go on a walk or play board games or what have you. So having those family agreements in place to start with is, I find really helpful and again, kind of unifying everyone. And then from there, this sort of template I'm thinking of that's on American Academy of Pediatrics site, it lets you then customize, okay, Johnny is this age, and because he's that age, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends he only has, Y amount of time on screens a day, right? Whereas, Sarah is X age, right? And so on and so forth. And so it's not saying you get more time or less time because you're good or you're bad or anything like that. It's just, this is how old you are. So again, sticking with the objective truths, just again tends to doesn't mean everyone's going to be happy about it, but it at least means typically people will accept it to a certain extent at least.
Yeah, I'm so happy you said that, and I know you're plugging something, but at the same time, I think this is so important for people to get guidance from. So we're gonna post in the show notes over here some links where people can get more information, because I think everything you're saying is golden. And when a family sees that, okay, so when I'm 9, this is what I'm able to get, and then when I'm 13, this is what I'm able to get. I think it sets a certain understanding about, okay, in the family role, things are different in different ages, and there's certain things expected from me. And as I'm expected to do certain things regarding my responsibilities at home, chores, homework, there's a later bedtime, there might be a little more screen time. Maybe it is an app I can download that I was not able to download at a certain time. And I think that's something that's really important for parents to implement, but they have to first believe it themselves that things are different in different roles. And obviously mom and dad have different roles as well. And that's okay, because that's what a family role, and that's what how family works in general. Of different people have different roles. The same way in a company, different people have different roles, and they're all important. Or a sports team, there are different roles. If everyone's going to be a quarterback, no one's going to get a touchdown. So I think that's really important. I'm so glad you said that. And I want to go back just though to one thing before. I want to talk a little bit more about the social aspect of things and the role that social media plays in the social aspect. But I'm curious, when it comes to that word that we're both, I think, a little bit hesitant to say at times, when it comes to the addictions world, are there certain things that you wish parents would either know more about when it comes to addictions, and therefore this is something that can be of benefit to them if they know certain things? And are there certain things, if that's something that is an issue within a household, are there certain things that they can now do that can be of benefit to the family dynamics of things?
Yeah, so I think to start with, when sort of trying to determine if you do need to take some action, or if there is some sort of dependency or addiction or abuse going on with the use of technology, there's like I was kind of like I was saying earlier, there's a couple like just really clear objective symptoms that you can pick out, and signs that you can pick out. So, if you're seeing more isolation, right, more avoidance of engaging with others, but also avoidance of discomfort, that's a big one. So, it's a fairly natural thing, right? We like touch a hot stove, we pull our hand away, right? That makes sense. But when we then start pulling ourselves away from, let's say, social situations that maybe were a little anxiety provoking, but ultimately, if we were to follow through on them, would be very rewarding and would be very glad that we did. Things like that, when the avoidance starts to happen with those sorts of, productive or positive discomfort experiences, that's a big one. Another is just that the tech use becomes the most important thing in life. So when you see that happen, which honestly is fairly common, that in and of itself does not mean your kid is addicted just because they want to play Minecraft more than they want to like go outside and throw the football around, or more than they want to like go to a movie with their parents. We know that these different tech activities, social media, gaming, etc., play on a very vulnerable part of the brain, right? Which is the dopamine pathways, is kind of the classic example. And right, that's the reward chemical. It makes us feel good and affirms what we're doing. So when you have a piece of technology or software or what have you that is giving you a huge, huge shot of this positive feeling, or you can get a similar positive feeling if you push past the discomfort of going and exercising for an hour, right? It's pretty clear, I think, what most of us would choose were we not, right, fully aware of the pitfalls and disadvantages and consequences, right, of picking the tech use over the exercise. So I think that's another big one that parents need to watch out for.
Yeah, everything is so spot on with, how I've looked at things and my experience both as a therapist and as a parent. And, you talk about Roblox, which I think is also a topic we could probably talk about for a really long time. And I think obviously there's a social aspect to it of being one of the games that can involve others. And that brings me, I think it's something that I've seen a lot of parents recently struggle with regarding that online social aspect that is, important because a child feels a part of something like we've been talking about, but at the same time, it can also get out of hand. Whether it's having a team that, or a game that you're playing from different time zones and therefore kids wanting to stay up later or wake up really early so they can play with people in other time zones or countries, to the fact of sometimes things can carry over into quote unquote real life when it comes to things that were said, or videos that were posted, or games and the way people acted or reacted to a certain situation in the game. And that can carry over into the classroom, into the basketball court, or maybe some other social settings. I'm curious, how can that be something that parents can monitor? And I say that word very, very choicely, but at the same time know that my child is safe when it comes to things carrying over from the online world into the real world.
Yeah, so with things like that, I mean, I think, again, when we're evaluating the sort of impact that, this tech use is having on our kids, and, just like you said, so much of the socialization ends up being digital, there's, an aspect of that we unfortunately just need to accept that, it's here to stay. And if we restrict it too much and don't let our kids engage with it, right, then they're going to be the odd person out. And as we've also seen in a lot of different sort of situations, not just tech related, over restricting actually can have kind of a rubber band effect later on in life. And so you definitely, and this is a huge thing I really try and get parents to follow through on, is, okay, you're using parental controls, right? There's a bajillion different options out there. You're monitoring, you're doing all of that sort of restricting. But if you just do that and you're not also teaching good digital wellness skills, then your kid isn't really learning how to use the tech in a healthy way. They're just being restricted. And, the restrictions in and of themselves certainly provide, something, of course, beneficial and helpful. But I really encourage people to take it a step further and to also use apps, programs, etc., that teach digital wellness. So, for example, the kid is allowed to go on Instagram, let's say an hour a day, but whenever they go to open that app up, the, let's say X digital wellness app first prompts them, hey, what's your intention of accessing this app? And it gives you a couple of things you can answer. And then based on your answer, it says, oh, you chose relieve anxiety. Why don't you first try taking 5 deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, using, your diaphragm. And then once you say, yes, I did that, or, I won't go into the details. There's ones that sync to Bluetooth and smartwatches and all that. But once you've done that, then it lets you use the app. So could the kid just click next? Sure. But the hope is that they are also bought into this idea that it's not just being restricted, having their autonomy constricted, but it's more about, hey, there's a greater purpose here. I'm trying to teach you how to do this on your own. The goal, is to remove all restrictions so you can just self-manage and self-monitor. So that's something that can be really useful in helping prevent those sorts of post-tech use consequences you were talking about. And again, I think to kind of put a point on it, when you're seeing those consequences start to build and build and build, and have a significant impact on one or more major parts of the kid's life, that means you got to intervene. It just has to happen at that point, because it's almost guaranteed it'll just kind of worsen from there.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought this all up. I think it's so important to have that balance, like we've been talking about. You have any examples of apps that parents can put onto the devices where they can have those prompts before they do something?
Yeah, there's a ton, and I certainly don't want to plug one versus another, but off the top of my head, there's a really simple one called Forest. There's another good one called Moment. Freedom is another good app. Opal. Yeah, there's a whole host of them, and I'll certainly share that with you. I actually have a link to a site that kind of aggregates all those different digital wellness apps.
Yeah, amazing, and it's necessary. I think it's for us parents as well. It's exactly. It's not just for the kids, and there are so many different areas, Alex, and I'm so glad having this discussion. I'm like on a little bit of a high, just like hearing you the way you're talking about like certain things, how to have a healthy understanding / balance and overall relationship when it comes to social media and online stuff. And I think one of the things that you were talking about here is having also a community. It's not just about the family, but when we have a community of friends and people, whether it's an online community or an in-person community, that's also, I think, has a very big impact when it comes to making sure that there's social media and technology is not going to turn into a abuse in a certain way. And I know this is something that someone I'm a big fan of, Leonard Sachs, and he talks about it in his book, Boys Adrift, and a few other books as well, when he talks about the concept of community. And community is one of those things that are so important because peer pressure, which again, another topic we could talk about for a very long time, peer pressure is probably one of the most important things when it comes to a child wanting to do certain things. So I'm curious if that's something that you've ever had any past experience with parents trying to create community for their children so that everyone can be on the same page. And instead of, hearing little Johnny say, well, Alex gets to have 6 hours a day, and how come I only get one? And when we have all the parents or that community come together to have 1 hour, or, we're going to have social media free day on every Friday, how is that something that we can try to work together to create those communities for our children?
You couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, that, and I think you touched on something that I just in my own experience, so rarely see recommended or echoed to parents, which is precisely what you said, that, look, if you really want your teen or your kid to learn how to have a healthy relationship with technology, you got to make sure that their peer group, ideally, right, has a standardized sort of, restriction. So when I have parents coming to me and saying, hey, we don't know what to do because, they're hearing about all these other kids that are allowed to do all this other gaming, or all their other friends have smartphones now. And, we tried getting them a flip phone and they just, refuse to use it. What do we do? That's the point where I usually push back and say, well, do you know the parents of their friends? Like, do you have a relationship with them? Have you spoken to them? Have you talked to them about this topic? And I think a lot of the times, and again, this is just one person's view and opinion and experience, but a lot of the times I think the answer is no. And it seems like, and again, maybe it was the pandemic, but there's just been less of that sort of cohesive, hey, we're a community, and as parents, we need to kind of band together and make sure that, everyone's roughly on the same page, at least with technology use. Because that certainly I find is the most effective thing by far. And I've yet to have parents go through that process and say it wasn't, incredibly worth maybe the initial social discomfort of reaching out to the, friends' parents that they haven't really talked to before. It really pays dividends, and I think is the single biggest, change behavior parents can do.
Yeah, 100%. So if it means having to have a barbecue or some cocktail party evening where you have a few parents come together, it's worth it.
Yeah.
And yes, you might have to clean up your house a lot. You might have to put together some sort of hors d'oeuvres menu or something like that, but it's worth it because you'll be able to sleep better at night. Not only tonight, but for the next 20 years, just because of different things that that can come up. And when you have that community and having us come together as parents, I think that goes really, really far. And Alex, this conversation could go on for a really, really long time, and there's so many subcategories that you and I can talk about. I'm trying to be mindful of the time over here. I'm curious, based on the way our conversation went, and before I finish up with some rapid fire questions over here, are there specific topics that, from what we talked about, that you want to emphasize more? Things that you want to be able to get out there that we haven't talked about?
Maybe just that there's like a question I get asked a lot is, how much is too much? And something that at least I've been seeing talked about more publicly, which just makes me so happy, is that, for one, there isn't a magic number, but also that it's so much more depends on the content versus the actual number of hours. So if a kid is spending, two kids are each spending 5 hours a day on technology, one of them is spending, 3 hours gaming, 2 hours on social media. The other one is spending, let's say, 2 hours gaming, and then an hour, taking a online course, or an hour or 2 hours, right, learning how to play a couple songs on their guitar by watching YouTube videos, right? That you can't, right? You just, of course, can't lump in with just kind of mindless gaming. And so I think that is a big one that I definitely want parents to be aware of and be attuned to, is what their kids are actually doing, how many hours are going into it. And so that's where the monitoring, I think, is important. Not because you need to know every single thing your kid does, but more so just to get like an honest impression, because they're probably not super conscious. And really to get that honest impression of, okay, well, how many hours are going into what? Because I often will, hear parents say, well, my kid says that I just keep walking in at the wrong time, and I'm not walking in during all these times they're doing their homework. And so having something like that is really useful. I'll take it a step further even and say, hey, I want you to give me the login to the, monitoring software or program. And I'm going to change the password, and I'm going to change it to something the kid chooses, so they know it's just between me and them. And we'll do that, temporarily for a couple of weeks. And I find that in and of itself is huge, because it removes the authority figure, right? It removes the parent from that equation, and we can have a really honest and real conversation about their use and, what they feel isn't serving them and what is.
Yeah, that's. I'm so glad you said that, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's such a great point of showing them that, hey, we're in this together, so let's do this together, and I'm here to support you in what you need, but yet also realize that there are dangers that could come about through what it is you're doing if you don't have a healthy balance with it. Sort of like food, it works the same way.
Yeah.
So it's about having that healthy balance, and we're a team and we're working on it together. And yes, there is a point to have a authoritarian figure when it comes to being a parent, but we also want to have that balance, like we were saying when we started, of being a friend in a healthy way without being a friend. So it's about understanding that, and I think it's such a great point, and I'm so glad that you're ending with that. Where can people find more of Alex?
You can find more of me on my website. It's all one word, resetfromtech.com. I've got a blog, some resources listed, and you can also contact me there as well.
Amazing. We're going to post all the links in our show notes, like together with the different companies that you were talking about here in our little talk today. I like finishing up with some little rapid fire questions over here. And I'm curious if there is either a book, a podcast, or a certain person that you follow that people maybe can get more information on this topic that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, I mean, I think the classic one is someone who I got the opportunity to train with back when I was an intern, and that's Dr. Anna Lembke over at Stanford. She came out with Dopamine Nation. If you've been living under a rock, you haven't heard of it, definitely would recommend checking that out. Screenagers is another really good one. As far as people, Hillary Cash, she's a mentor of mine and someone who I turned to very early on in my own education. She started a program called Restart, which is really like, the treatment center for technology addiction in the country. And then, like I was saying earlier, Children's Screen Time Action Network and Fair Play, which is their parent company.
Amazing. Yeah, that's, I think, some very, very valuable resources. If you can think of someone in history that you would like to have lunch with that is not alive anymore, who would that be?
Whoa. Let's see. I think... Great question. I think Socrates would be really interesting because I have some questions for him from my undergrad philosophy class.
Hopefully you'll be able to communicate him with different languages. But yeah, that sounds like a good one. And I answered that we'd never be given on this podcast. So thank you for saying that. Sure. Last question for you over here. If you could think of a everyday mundane superpower that you would like to have as a parent, guidance counselor, or a therapist, what would that superpower be?
I think instilling this sort of core sense of hope and faith that things will ultimately work out and that the person's situation will ultimately lead to growth and all is not lost.
So instilling
and in fact,
hope.
They're actually on the road to, healing, even if it doesn't feel that way.
Well, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's a superpower I would like to be given to me.
Yeah,
sense.
right.
So, well, this has been a real pleasure, Alex. Thank you so much for a few minutes today.